expanded region annexed by Israel. That's doubly illegal. Today's announcements, for example. It's doubly illegal because it's also in violation of explicit Security Council demands that nothing be done to change the status of Jerusalem. It goes back to 1968. In fact, the U.S., which at that time was part of the world, voted with everyone, unanimous vote. So it's doubly illegal. But that's a precondition. Furthermore, Israel has made it clear, you can read it in today's papers, that the expansion is proceeding in regions which will be annexed to Israel, illegally, of course. Well, it's a further precondition. They're already establishing borders, officially, which they're going to illegally annex. That's another precondition. And under those conditions, preconditions, everyone who has a gray cell functioning, and certainly the Palestinians, can see that nothing will happen. Negotiations of this kind can go on indefinitely while Israel, with U.S. support, diplomatic, military, economic support, simply takes over what's left of what they don't want in the West Bank, let the population sort of rot in these fragments, and it'll be a kind of fried chicken. If they want to call it a state, okay. Also, the U.S. and Israel insist that it be separated from Gaza. That's been U.S.-Israeli policy since the early 90s, in explicit violation of the Oslo agreements, which insist that Gaza and the West Bank are a single territorial entity. But Israel and the United States have been trying hard to separate them since the early 90s. An interesting story, no time to go into it here, but you should know about it. And the reasons are pretty obvious. That means if any fragments are left to Palestinians in the West Bank, they'll be completely imprisoned with no access to the outside world. They'll be imprisoned between these regions annexed to Israel in the West Bank, Israel, and the Jordanian dictatorship. Gaza would be the only access to the outside, so of course it has to be separated. Those are the preconditions, and you can understand why. You can ask whether the Palestinian Authority made a wise or an unwise tactical move in trying to approach the United Nations to get around this, but it's perfectly understandable that they would seek some way to get around farcical negotiations of this kind with their obvious consequences.
Noam, have a drink, because I'd like to move on to talking about money next.
About?
Money.
Money, okay. You're getting crass.
Wealth. Seems that the simple narrative has been that it's in all our interests that the rich get richer, because that's how they create more jobs for the rest of us. Is the Occupy Wall Street movement a sign that there's a widespread shift in that perception? Where do you think the movement will go? What effect, what impact do you think it'll have?
Well, first of all, we should ask about this perception. That is the perception of the media, the corporate boardrooms, the editorial boards, elite opinion, established elite opinion. It's certainly not the general population. It's certainly not the view of the general population. The United